I was often in meetings as the only woman. My eyes were open to the challenges quite early on. You've got to be asking deeper, better questions and engage with people. Walk the floors, find out what's really going on. One of the most valuable is that curiosity. How do you get people to talk to you? How do you get to the truth of the matter?
Welcome to Grit in the Boardroom, the podcast that takes you behind closed doors to unpack the pivotal decisions that shaped organisations for better or worse. I'm Erika Eliasson-Norris, and each week I sit down with a senior leader who stood at the edge of a defining moment, a crisis, a turning point, a challenge where the stakes were high and the outcome uncertain. These are the conversations you won't find in annual reports. Honest, strategic, and grounded in lived experience. Because governance isn't about theory, it's about pressure, people, and making the call. My guest today is Emma Parry, a financial services senior executive turned board advisor, whose career spans continents, industries, and some of the most complex governance challenges in banking and fintech. One thing that people probably don't know about her is that she began her career working for an Australian government in a department focused on intelligence and national security, a role that taught her early on about discretion, risk, and the importance of making the right call under pressure. At HSBC, she established and chaired the Global Product Governance and Best Execution Committees, influencing strategy across 39 countries and working directly with regulators such as the UK's Financial Conduct Authority. Today, she is Chair and Independent Non-Exec Director of Kyrex UK, founder of NovaFin Consulting and an expert witness in the UK High Court. She's advised on global anti-fraud and risk culture initiatives, written extensively on conduct and governance, and guided organisations on how to build fairer, more accountable outcomes for clients and stakeholders. Welcome to Grit in the Boardroom, Emma. Let's get into it.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So to start with, Emma, you've had a truly global career and you now sit on boards. Was there a particular moment that made you realise just how few women still make it into these spaces?
It's a really interesting question. So much of my sort of last part of my career, notwithstanding the beginning in the Australian government, I was working in the investment bank and I was often in meetings as the only woman. So in a way, my eyes were open to the challenges quite early on. More recently, I set up my own company, and I continue to watch what's happening in the industry, looking at the surveys that take place around gender balance, pay gaps, and whilst there is some improvements, there's still a long way to go in terms of achieving parity, equity, and creating diversity at the most senior levels of firms, but also throughout the organisation so that there's actually a succession plan of women and diversity moving up through the ranks as well.
And is that something that you say you've kind of noticed, but was that through the whole of your career when you were far more early in your career? Did you see that that was the path that you were treading, or is it only when you've kind of got to the kind of boardroom and then you've looked back and then thought, actually, there's not that many women around?
Yeah, it's become more apparent as I've been getting into the non-exec space. And to give you an example of how I found my place on the board is actually I was approached by somebody who was already on a board and they recognised they had a diversity problem. There were no women, not at the board level, nor at the senior management level. And so they were, I'm not going to say desperate, but kind of desperate to get more diversity of thought, diversity of representation at the board level. And that's actually how I became a non-exec. This is a longer story, but that's the short answer to your question is it become more apparent as I've become more senior, I suppose, yes.
So how did you feel when you were approached to take on that role? Because you say that you felt to a certain extent that they wanted a woman in that particular position. I think you and I would probably both agree that it's not great to be the token person and be the person that's just put on that board just because you're a particular gender or just because you have a certain ethnicity or background or whatever that might be. How did you feel?
And this is the challenge, right? Because you have there is in some quarters, a sense of box ticking. We need to have a woman, we need to have, Afro-Caribbean, whatever the box that needs to be ticked. I did recognise there could be a challenge around that. So I met with the CEO and had a discussion about the company, where they were at, and also to understand what gaps they had in terms of the capabilities at a senior level and at the board. And it's quite interesting because it's a very small board. So it's myself and another Ned and then some of the C-suite. And they have a really good level of capability and expertise in payments, which is what the firm is about, and around compliance as it relates to financial crime, AML, and so on and so forth. But what I bring, and what I was really keen to explore further, was my product governance background, my experience in dealing with clients, and so bringing that additional dimension to the board, which wasn't there. So whilst you could say, was it box ticking? Well, potentially, because they recognised a problem, but I bring quite a lot of additional value and expertise that they didn't have. So I can very much justify and say, I'm there for a reason, I've earned my place.
Absolutely. And how did they make you feel when you joined?
Oh, I was thrilled beyond thrilled, because I had wanted to expand my career into the non-exec space for years. And I had attempted through various different channels to do that. So, for example, I had signed up to quite a couple of what's now almost a cottage industry of firms and organizations that are set up to help non-execs get on executive positions.
Yes.
And they advertise, so they've got job boards, some of them are better than others, so some will critique your CV. And so I had joined a couple of those through the years with no success, I hasten to add, although I now have a much better board CV. And it was just somewhat ironic that it was through my network being tapped on the shoulder, and that's how I was approached about the board role. So it's quite an interesting way in the end.
For someone that's aiming for their first non-exec director role, what do you think they need to understand about board appointments that's not in the job description? You touched on it slightly there about some of the kind of skills that you bring, but also I think it's understanding the value that you bring to be able to step into that new role,
Yes.
even when you may be slightly fearful this is the first time you've done it. So how does that work?
Yeah, it's a really great question, because it's not just about your expertise anymore. In fact, when you craft your board CV, it's all about your committee experience, how you've gained consensus over a particularly difficult topic, or how you've led or helped to lead the company through, say, an IPO or FCA approval. These are big strategic initiatives, and they're not, people aren't looking for your project management experience. They're looking at how you work with people. We touched on that a bit earlier, how you work with people, how you size people up, the sorts of challenges you might get in the boardroom, and how you can navigate those. So people are looking for a different skill set. I mean, obviously you have to have the expertise behind you, but it's how you draw that information out and how you create your value proposition, how you sell yourself as a board member, not just a project manager or a COO or head of client service or whatever it might be. It's a very different lens that you need to craft.
What sorts of skills do you think you can kind of pull out of an executive career to kind of adapt to that non-exec director role?
Communication skills, absolutely front and center. The navigation through challenges and issues, and how you can adapt your management style and your communication style to get through what can be quite tricky obstacles. So there's those types of EQ skills. And then there's some sort of fundamentals around risk, finance, regulation. You've got to be able to understand broadly the types of challenges that your particular company is going to face. Some of them are going to be the same, but some of them are going to be quite specific. So, for example, we've all got legal challenges, we've all got financial challenges, but if you're a payments company, for example, obviously you've got to understand what the payments regulations are and understand so you can ask the right questions in the board meeting. So it's a combination of things.
And you've had a very interesting career, particularly around kind of the anti-corruption type work. And you must have worked with some organisations that have been through some quite challenging times. You talk about kind of communication skills. How do you think that experience you were able to kind of bring in with regards to communication skills, maybe completely different sector, completely different experience, but it shaped you as a person? How has it done that? Because that might give kind of an example to people listening about how they might adapt their own executive skills to something non-executive related.
Yeah. So I've got a few examples. One I think is particularly, well, I'm quite proud of actually, is being appointed or instructed as an expert witness on a court case in the High Court. And that is all about communication. So it's about, in the first instance, understanding the evidence that was presented. This particular case was a potential breach of regulations, so understanding what the regulations were, doing a compare and contrast, and then writing the report that was then tabled in the courtroom. And so that's very much honing the communications piece, but with a very precise application, because in a court of law, you've got to be precise, you've got to be accurate, you've got to be correct. And so this is not just writing like a novel. You've actually got to write something that's going to stand up in court. So that would be one example I would give of where I've applied my communication skills. And then it's also, I had to interview people as well. So it's not just writing, but interviewing people who had been involved in the case to get their side of the story, to understand where they were coming from, understand their understanding of the regulations as well. So almost like an investigator, if you will. Yeah.
Which requires you to have a certain level of objectivity and be able to take into account other people's perspectives that may not be yours.
Precisely. Yes, exactly. Being able to stay attuned to the data and being objective is critical. And another thing that we know is important in the boardroom is that sometimes you can have a very heated discussion about a topic and you've got to gain consensus. How do you keep your calm? How do you keep your head in that? Stay with the data, stay with the facts, understand where people's objections may be, but ultimately stick with the facts. What's the objective? Where do we need to get to? And be a bit cool-headed about it to get that consensus in the end.
And just a question from me, how did you manage to become an expert witness on a high court case? It sounds amazing.
I get that question a lot, actually. So I was recommended by a colleague. She is a lawyer, and she was initially approached to be the expert witness, but she couldn't because she had a conflict of interest on the case. So she recommended me to the barrister. I was then interviewed by the barrister and got the role. So again, this is about the network. And we speak about that in terms of non-exec roles, board appointments. It's often through the network. But a lot of my opportunities through work have been through my network, be it non-exec roles or, expert witness.
And how have you built that network over time?
Lots of ways. I go to a lot of conferences. I do lots of speaking events, so I network in person. I've got to admit I'm a bit of a fanatic on LinkedIn, which some people will say, oh my goodness, why are you mentioning LinkedIn? Because I've found it really useful. I'm a naturally engaging person. I do find that, I make connections quite easily. In fact, I think I talked the ear off the poor taxi driver on the way over here. It got me talking about Australia, which is obviously where I've lived for a while. And I was giving him tips on traveling and don't go at Christmas time because it's really expensive. So I'm a bit bubbly, I suppose.
It's great, though, to be able to talk to people so openly and be your authentic self. I think that can really help. I've definitely seen in my career directors that are trying to be someone or trying to be something because that's kind of what they feel the box needs, that type of person.
Right.
And
Yes.
and they can often find it quite a stilting type of experience when they go into a networking event or even talking to people in the business, and they just become somebody that's very different and they don't like it because they're, oh, hang on, I've stepped outside my own box here. But it sounds like that you don't have that problem.
No, I don't. No, I don't think I've ever really had that problem. As we were discussing earlier, I moved around a lot when I was growing up, and it gave me a lot of confidence and a lot of exposure to different cultures, different ways of working, and I think that's rubbed off on me as well as an adult. I'm much more confident to just go into a room and introduce myself, which I know is hard for a lot of people.
But I guess what's the worst that can happen?
Well, yes, exactly. What is the worst? They can just turn away from you? It's unlikely.
Absolutely. And if you're not the person that is, if you're the person that's being that outgoing person, then the other person probably instantly puts you in a box of, oh, they're really chatty. That's great. Let's go and chat to them.
Yes.
And then the pressure gets taken off because then somebody else steps in.
Yeah. But do you find that? I mean, you seem very bubbly as well, so...
Yes. I get spoken to all sorts of different times and events, and just even in the supermarket, people saying, shall I buy this one or this one? And I just think, I don't know why I have something to add to this discussion, but, great.
Some people gravitate to...
Yeah, I think it's being open in terms of body language, in terms of approachability.
Yes.
And just being a friendly face and smiling. I think sometimes people forget to do that.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
So you've led on culture, conduct and risk across global financial institutions. Why do you think so many board appointments still come through the kind of closed legacy networks?
There has definitely been over the years the boys' club and people gravitating to people that they've worked with. They're a known quantity. They've worked with them. For them, a safe bet. The challenge with that, and I've seen it happen, is you get companies with a senior management team that have only ever worked together, majority male, and not necessarily therefore being as cognitively diverse as they potentially could be. So there is a need to break the boys' club. I mean, look, it can be a girls' club as well. Don't get me wrong. And I have to be a bit careful because I was tapped on the shoulder for my board role because I was a known quantity. So it does work. I think the challenge for boards particularly is for the number of candidates that you need to fill your NED roles. How are you filling them? What's the process? And okay, so you've got maybe in a large board, you probably have a couple of people who've worked together before or know of somebody who might be appropriate. Again, this is about visibility and building your brand. Where I'm going with this is you've got to have an element of determined process to create the diversity that should be there. If we're talking about good governance, it should be about having the cognitive diversity at the board level.
So with the kind of cognitive diversity, how do you think boards can bring that in if they don't have it already? Because it can obviously be quite a challenge. You said that you kind of were brought in as well. No doubt those people all knew each other before on the board and you were very different.
Yes.
And you said that they welcomed you, which is fantastic. But how do you think that boards can help with that sort of process? What do you think the board that you were part of, thought process did they go through to get to the stage of thinking, actually we would like Emma on this, and we want to reach out to her?
Yeah. So let me answer the broad question first, and then I'll answer the specific. So things that boards should be doing. So there are now specialist NED headhunters. They are often on LinkedIn. If you are interested in a NED role, get on LinkedIn, create a profile, start reaching out. That's the first thing. So it's not just the board, it's the people who want to be on the boards. It's a two-way street, right? How are they going to find you if you're not visible? So there's the headhunters. There's also quite a lot of job boards that are actually free to access. I'm going to mention LinkedIn again, but also the government, the UK government and Cabinet Office is also actively promoting its open vacancies, and their process is very much around ensuring diversity. I know because I've applied for unsuccessfully. I don't know why. But their process includes stripping away from your CV anything that could indicate your gender, your age, or anything that could be almost discriminated against. And then they also ask behavioural questions as well. And this is at the start of the process. So there are ways that I'm seeing that boards can use to get that diversity. So it's a bit lazy if all they're doing is tapping someone on the shoulder. Which brings me to my experience. So the company in question had a lot of people who knew each other before the company was set up. Because they are open to the diversity question, not everybody is, they recognise they needed diversity. Let's call it that. I was visible and I had expressed an interest in becoming a NED. And so it's a two-way thing. Oh, Emma, we know Emma wants to be on a board. She's already stated that. We know what she can do because she's visible and she tells us and she promotes what she's been doing. So two-way street.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that when you secured your first NED role, do you think it becomes easier to show your value? Because so many people have said to me, until you get the first one, then you can't do it. It's like the first anything, whatever you want to train to be, it's getting that first job that shows that you can demonstrate your skills. Until you get that break, it's challenging.
I'm kind of laughing, smiling, because it's the catch-22. Virtually every NED position being advertised, they say you have to have previous NED experience. It's that catch-22. How do you get that experience? And so ironically, yes, I'm now getting interviewed for roles, other NED roles, because I've already got one. So your point is very well made. It is difficult. And the suggestion I have for people is if they're in a current executive role and they have capacity to do a trustee role or some other type of board role, do it and get that experience early on, because it makes it a lot easier later if you are wanting to transition to a portfolio career. If you've got the experience, you're going to be able to get more of those types of roles because you've demonstrated your capability.
Absolutely. And I found in my own career, if you can demonstrate the skill set that's required for that particular role in a different way, just as you say, then that's really helpful, even if it's something that's completely different, even if it's your local sports club or whatever else it might be, that you can volunteer to do something. And it just gives you that edge of being able to demonstrate what you're saying you can do.
Exactly.
People want to be able to see that you can actually do it before they give you that opportunity.
Yeah. So one of the experiences that I've put on my board CV are the committees that I chaired at HSBC, because I set them up and then I led them. And that's great experience and shows that you are, board ready. Although, albeit that your experience was in, a salaried role as opposed to a non-exec. But absolutely. There's so much that we do as we go through our careers. And it's a shame if we don't repurpose and rebrand ourselves drawing on that knowledge and experience that we can bring to the table.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. I've heard it a few times now from people in all different kind of leadership roles of that rebranding, of needing to, on a regular basis, whether that's 6 monthly, annually, look at what you're giving to the organisation and match that up with what you also want to get out of it, whether you're in a salaried role, whether you're in a non-exec director role, and think, am I adding the value that I should be adding? Because that allows you to, throw away any imposter syndrome you might possibly have. But also, if push comes to shove and, there's an opportunity for you to move somewhere else, then you can assess it with a much clearer head.
Yeah. I think that's so important now more than ever, because the days of just being in one role for 30 or 40 or 50 years, depending on your longevity, is very rare. You have to, and it's something that I've been continually doing, in part because I'm quite ambitious and I like a new challenge, right? So every few years I've been like, right, what's next? Because I've done that. But you should be looking at what you're doing, your CV, your aspirations, and also what the job market is doing. So I'm reading so much about AI and jobs disappearing. But on the other hand, there are other jobs appearing as well. So you've got to keep an eye out on what the trends, the challenges, some of the issues that we're seeing, and think about how can I reinvent myself if I had to, if I was made redundant, or because I want to, how do I reinvent myself? What skill sets do I have that I can bring to the table in a new role, in a new capacity, in a portfolio career?
You seem very much like a self-driven individual. What do you think has made you like that?
That's a really good question. I think in part it's the confidence piece, but it's also I'm very much a thinker. Ask me at 3:00 in the morning when I'm awake, but I'm a curious person. I'm curious about the world, how things are evolving. I'm one of these people. I don't think I'll ever really retire, because I like having something to think about, puzzles to kind of solve. That's just the way I've been made, I'm afraid. My DNA is curious.
That's amazing, though. I think that if you can retain that throughout, your life on a board, that brings such an amazing dynamic, because if you always have that curious mind, then you're not going to go in with that fixed mindset of this is the way that it's always been, this is the way it should be, this is the way I've seen it done before, this is definitely the answer. Yeah. You're going to go in and say, this could be the same answer, but actually could be something different.
Yeah. I see it in a lot of the fascination people have with dashboards. So I've seen it happen, actually, where you've got a dashboard that's all green, everything's fine. And then the next month there's some catastrophic issue that comes out of the woodwork and people are caught unawares. And so you've got to be asking deeper, better questions and engage with people, walk the floors, find out what's really going on. You've got to be curious. And I think that's one of the traits of a board member that I think is probably, from my perspective, one of the most valuable, is that curiosity. How do you get people to talk to you? How do you get to the truth of the matter? And if you're a bit shy and don't like to network, then you need to work on that, because you've got to be around the table bringing that information out of people, drawing it out, getting people to talk.
Yeah, and getting people to open up is really important, particularly in a non-exec director role, particularly if, as you say, you're walking the floor or you're finding out things from people. It can be quite daunting, right, for them to speak to somebody that in their eyes is incredibly senior, particularly if they are in a junior role or a manual job, and they have someone coming up and they instantly have that imposter syndrome of someone's going to come and criticize what I'm doing. Actually, you're just asking questions. But how do you get people to warm up to you? Because you seem like the sort of person that finds that very easy.
I'm very down to earth. And so I often open with a question, not like, what's the weather doing or where was your last holiday? But things like, tell me a little bit about your day. So you ask an open question rather than a yes-no is always a good place to start. Get them talking and then see what they offer up. And from there, build on the insights that they're starting to give you. And I'm not going to say interrogate, but drill into some of what they're telling you. Say, for example, you're on the shop floor and it's a manufacturing, and you want to understand more about health and safety. You could quite justifiably ask, tell me about your day. How does it start? Get them talking. And then if they happen to start talking about health and safety, or, perhaps last week there was an accident or an incident, ask them about it. What was their experience of that? How did they become aware of it? What was done on the back of it? So you can start asking those types of questions. Again, open-ended, get them talking, and be quiet, get them to talk.
And in all your roles, and particularly as a non-exec director, ethics is really important. And having strong values.
Yes.
Do you feel you've ever had your values or ethics tested in any kind of environment so far in your career?
No, not directly and personally. What I would say, though, is I've become aware of or have met or worked with people who have had their ethics challenged. And there are quite a number of cases that people will be aware of where unethical behaviour, in fact misconduct of the most criminal level, happened at the board level. So I know one of your other interviewees is Pav Gill, the Wirecard whistleblower. That's a prime example of where the board ran rogue completely. And it's kind of interesting because you hear a lot from regulators and industry commentators about tone from the top. The board should set the tone and then it should trickle down. And what happens if the tone is toxic? Then, it's obviously not going to work. So you've got to instill, and I think this is where the FCA here in the UK is doing a better job than some others of the regulators, is making it absolutely crystal clear that conduct and ethical behaviour is everybody's responsibility. It's not just at the board level, but it's all through the layers of the organisation as well.
And what's one habit or step that our listeners can take this week to move closer to the boardroom?
Love that question. And you probably won't be surprised to say one of the things that I found particularly helpful, and your listeners may as well, is, again, if you go onto LinkedIn, there are a lot of senior people, CEOs and board level advisors who post regularly about their experiences, about strategy, about challenges that they're overcoming. And you can learn so much, and it's free. And the bonus tip here is, if you really want to start building your visibility, is you can actually comment on those posts as well. And I'm not just some, platitude, but if they've raised a strategic question or challenge and you have an idea about it or want to share a viewpoint, do so. Don't be scared to share your opinion. Build your confidence in finding your voice.
Yeah, that sounds great. And it does sound like LinkedIn is particularly helpful for building those connections across divides that you may not have access to those type of people already within your network.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much an equal platform. I do go on about it. I post a lot. I do a lot of networking through it. And it's helped me build my career since leaving the banking world and building a portfolio career. Virtually all of my work and initiatives have come through my network that I've built through there, as well as obviously meeting people in person and, socializing. But, I found it particularly helpful.
And my final question, what do you think is the most underrated skill for aspiring non-exec directors to develop?
This, I think, is going to be understanding corporate governance, because I would say most people during their salaried career wouldn't necessarily have exposure to what a corporate governance person does. They might think, they just take the minutes. But there's so much more to that. And it becomes critical when you're in a NED role. So that would be my suggestion.
Great. Fantastic. That's great. Thank you very much for joining me on Grit in the Boardroom and for sharing such candid look at what really goes on.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me here.
Reflecting on the conversation with Emma, I think there are 3 key points that I would like to cover. One is that networking is absolutely key. It's so important to be able to diversify your network and grow it. She made some very good suggestions about LinkedIn, and I think that that's something that we can all take away and use. I think that it's also important to bring your genuine self to any non-exec director role, but also to networking. I think that if people get to know the real you, then you won't have anything to worry about when you do step into that boardroom for the first time. And I also think that it's really important to develop the skill set that you will need for that first non-exec director role ahead of time. You can do that in an executive career through, as Emma suggested, chairing a committee or other skills that may be part of voluntary work that you might do. And that will allow you to demonstrate in practice what that board is expecting you to deliver in that room.